I need to sing?
Oh, yes, you do. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Dr. Sam Soete. I guess I'd just like to start off by thanking Kira for creating such a beautiful space for everyone to get together. Very, very grateful to be here. Um, all right, so my talk is called The Way Back into the Light. I'm going to talk a bit about my experience with modernity and sort of modern civilization. And I think many of you will relate to it quite a bit. And then I'll dive into evolutionary biology and then a bit about light as well. So a bit about me. I'm a medical doctor, but after spending 6 years studying exactly which medications to give, which algorithms to follow at particular times, I realized that I knew very little about health. All you learn about is disease, all you learn about is when things go wrong, and it's a very reactive approach. And so I was a lot more interested in salutogenesis, which is the drivers of health rather than pathogenesis. I would say I'm just a really curious guy. I like to learn. So hopefully I can teach you some things, and if I get things wrong, please let me know, because I'm happy to learn as well. All right, so modern humans are lost, and we're looking for a way back home. I think despite the incessant marketing of modernity, many of us can feel in our bones that something is not right. But it's very difficult to put our finger on exactly what's going wrong. And so I'm going to do my part today to try and break down that dam and release the river. So we are living lives of quiet desperation, but we're told that this is the best things have ever been. And so we can ask ourselves if the wonders of modernity are worth the price that we pay. Sure, a lot of things are a lot better now than they were before, but the question we have to ask ourselves is how long before, and what price did we pay to get here? So we have hauled our ancient hominid bodies into a modern landscape of overindulgence and deprivation at the same time. We are both overfed and yet undernourished. We are inactive, starved of sunlight, sleep deprived, trapped in competition, surrounded by inequality, and yet we still feel socially isolated. We are told that this is paradise, and actually where we are right now really does feel like paradise, to be honest, but not in our regular lives, not in the busy cities. We somehow believe what we're told. And the very dangers that civilization claims to shield us from often arise within civilization itself. And so, don't expect us to thank you for showing up with a bucket of water after you set our house on fire. I think that's a very adept analogy. So above the water, the Titanic was a tribute to human achievement. But at the bottom of the ocean, it serves as a monument to the dangers of hubris. And I think this sort of relates to a lot of marvels of modernity, where we don't really take into account the second and third order effects. Modernity is sucker's folly maxing, and what that means is that we have the inclination to embrace immediate rewards. We're blind to risks and long-term costs, while normalizing adherence, even when the overall outcome is catastrophic. And so that's a very funny image there, but when you take into account that this is our entire society, it's quite troubling. So if you visit a zoo these days, you will inevitably come across eyes that are pleading for release, for intimacy, maybe even death, anything but more of the same. And the term that this refers to is zoochosis. And I actually think we relate to this feeling so deeply because we might share it. We also feel like we're part of the walking dead. And so the well-being of animals in captivity depends on the degree to which their enclosures recreate the environment in which they evolved. And we live in a zoo that we ourselves have built, and we need to understand what human life was like before we woke up in cages. And if you can convince people that their dire conditions are the natural and eternal state of affairs, the impulse for rebellion is castrated. And if you can convince people that being sick, fat, and depressed is the norm, then really what you're doing is you're removing any sense of responsibility or ownership over your own health, and you end up outsourcing your health to the very people that benefit from its absence, and that's a very dangerous place to be. So for millennia, human beings have thrived on this planet without destroying it or ourselves. What we are presented with now, I would say, is not the nature of our species, but rather the nature of modern civilization, which is an emergent social structure that's holding us hostage. And so we are told to view nature as an enemy to be feared and conquered rather than an ally to be honored. And you can see from these sort of article headlines how to get absolutely no sun this summer. Does UV radiation cause cancer? And should we dim the sun, will we even have a choice? And so these are very, very dark headings, but at the end of the day, evolutionary biology tells us otherwise. And so that's what we're going to dig into now. Our body is a map of human prehistory and the environment in which it evolved, and has been etched by the flow of time. And so each biological feature is an intricate response to the natural world it expects to encounter. So the bird's wings are sort of crafted by the resistance of the wind, and the skin of the dolphin glides through water's resistance. And so our bodies narrate the accumulated experiences of those that came before us. And modernity is not painting on a blank canvas, although it likes to think so. Over millennia, it has been grooved, cracked, and colored by the experiences of our ancestors. Raw food tastes really good, but cooking it smells good as well. The sun on our skin feels orgasmic, and thunder is awesome. Children are precious, and a loving touch is everything. And so when we learn these things, we can really start to align ourselves with how we're supposed to live. And so yeah, we need to critically examine the present in light of a clear understanding of the past in order to craft an environment that's conducive to human thriving. I believe the most all-encompassing way to describe our world is as hyper-novel. Everything that our bodies experience is new. And so we are ancient bodies in a modern world. And so yeah, we're basically fish out of water, and we're starting to dry out. And I think many of us are feeling that now. Evolutionary mismatches are behind most of our health problems. And if we don't understand our distant past, we're going to be condemned to live lives structured in ways that conflict with our deepest human physiology. The modern world is the ultimate human zoo, and we really designed a zoo that is very different to how we evolved. And so our world becomes a very profoundly unhappy and unhealthy place for many human animals. And this is one of my favorite quotes. It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And really what this states is that if we look around us and our world is very distorted, we have to have the courage and bravery to be contrarians, not only in our thought, but also in our actions. Oh yeah, this is a picture of Yoda. This was more of a joke, but actually it's very fitting, because I think if we are being contrarian, if we are going against the grain, we're going to be facing a lot of negative energy, and really we have to be able to take on that energy and not absorb it, but then release it back in a wave of positivity. So we don't want to be chromophores for negative energy. This is Chesterton's fence. I'm not sure if you guys have come across this metaphor, but it's one that really highlights the precautionary principle. It's basically a metaphorical fence that's placed on the middle of the road. And modern man typically walks up to the fence and he says, well, you know, what the hell is this doing here? I don't know why there's a fence in the middle of the road. And so he's like, let's remove it. It's going to be very useful to have that road. So let's remove it. And then someone that understands the precautionary principle will tell him, no, there's no way I'm going to let you remove that fence, because you have no idea what it does. And so go away and have a think. And once you understand its function, its purpose, then I'll let you remove it. But very often, once you understand why something's there, you will no longer wish to remove it, even if it's most convenient to you. So yeah, and it's very fitting, because Chesterton wrote that at a time when medical doctors thought the large intestine was just a waste of space. So yeah, I would say remember Chesterton's fence. So look out for things that centralized institutions are trying to get rid of without sufficient understanding. And I think the incandescent light bulb is a very good example of that, or maybe the moving away from animal foods as well. So centralized medicine has refused to adopt evolutionary thinking, opting instead for pharmaceutical fixes that too often create new problems while only temporarily masking the old ones. And we can ask ourselves, what has this led to? I think we all know the chronic disease prevalence is just skyrocketing constantly. Even though Americans are smoking less, cancer prevalence is still ticking up. We're exercising more. Alcohol consumption is down since the 1980s, but somehow we're still getting fatter, and obesity and diabetes is still skyrocketing. And so there are countless environmental mismatches which might be driving this, but I think the most important one is one that we're most blind to, even though it is the very thing that allows us to see, and that is light itself. So yeah, what is light? The sun represents the single largest energy input to the Earth and the human body, for that matter. And it provides the electromagnetic spectrum under which all of life evolved, extending between 250 and 4,000 nanometers. Photons are packets of energy, and I'm really not a physicist, so if I get anything wrong, please go ask Sarah Pugh. She will be able to clarify. So yeah, there are elementary particles that make up light. The amount of energy a photon carries depends on its wavelength frequency. And so every color possesses a distinct wavelength which determines its specific location on this spectrum here. So you can see ultraviolet light has a shorter wavelength, and it carries more energy, whereas infrared light has a longer wavelength and carries less energy. I think we all know from watching the sunrise and being in the sun midday to sunset that the electromagnetic spectrum the sun provides changes throughout the day, and this is very important because in a modern world we tend to have just fixed lighting. So in the sunrise we have a 3-to-1 ratio of near-infrared photons to visible photons. This sort of equalizes at noontime, and then at sunset this again takes a sort of nature of a 3-to-1 ratio. And interestingly, campfires and incandescent bulbs have a 10-to-1 ratio of near-infrared light. Okay, but this is no longer the world that we live in today. No, these are very beautiful pictures, and the sort of clusters of light, they might mirror the heavens when looked at from space, but when we're on the ground, staring up at night, the stars in the sky are actually fading away. And so yeah, what impact does this have on the living world? Well, insects are missing their appointments with pollinating flowers. Bird migrations are being disrupted. Turtles hatching are heading towards the road and towards the streetlights instead of the sea. And trees are holding onto their leaves long into autumn. And humans have lived for hundreds and thousands of generations under the natural spectrum of the sun. But in 1879, the incandescent light bulb was invented, and this led us to spend our days indoors, and led to very, very dim days, and then we'd keep the lights on at night so we could keep working, and that led to brighter nights. And actually, we used to spend all of our time outdoors because we didn't have many other options. Maybe we'd seek out the shade when it got too hot, but we'd still be exposed to natural light. And now we've moved to 93% indoors, which is the largest change in evolutionary history of our electromagnetic spectrum. The amount of lux you live under is up to you. I love this picture because it clearly shows how when we add modern things to our environment, it changes our light environment. And so if we're playing out in the sun, we might get 100,000 lux, like the guy in the pool there. But if we're indoors, maybe we're just getting 300. And this is actually, 2 orders of magnitude difference, which is crazy. So our biophysical environment controls our internal biochemistry. I would say that health is sort of balanced between our main regulatory systems, the endocrine and the neurological system. And if we have those in balance, then we're able to maintain homeostasis, and actually light plays a really important role in establishing that. So yeah, I think the hypothalamus it's really an ancient command center that controls these two systems, and it acts as the mediator between our external environment and our internal one, and it allows light to to have all of these effects. Because when I was first learning about this, I had no idea something so ephemeral, something so intangible, how does it actually affect our biology? And this is where it got really interesting for me. So as life evolved, as it started moving out of the oceanic environments to terrestrial land, it had to start adapting to natural sunlight. It had to adapt to the day and light cycle. And the hypothalamus is very important in that the retinohypothalamic tract is the way in which light communicates with our brain. So the original role of the retina was not vision actually, but rather the simple and very basic detection of light to regulate internal rhythms. And so the RHT evolved to connect the retina to the hypothalamus, allowing light signals to directly impact the hypothalamic pituitary system. And this is the pathway. And so it starts with these very cool cells in the retina called the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. And they contain a pigment called melanopsin, which is sensitive to blue and green light. And under that stimulus, it actually then connects to the SCN, or the master clock of the body, and then that regulates all of the other organ clocks later down the line, and also via the superior cervical ganglion connects to the pineal gland. And this is just an image. I don't know what any of these things are really, but it just shows how the SCN connects to all of these different nuclei in the brain, and really shows how light touches everything. And this is how our eyes act as the gateways to life. So this is a study from Fritz Hollwich's book, which I recently read, and it's very interesting. I recommend it. The diagram that's drawn here is the sella turcica, which is sort of a part of the skull, which is where the pituitary gland rests. And as you can see in blind people on the left there, the size of it is really small compared to those that can see. And so we can think that stimulus of light through the eyes can actually change the size of our pituitary gland. And why is that important? Because the pituitary gland connects to all of our endocrine organs, and that's how our body is regulated. This is again another picture from that same book. On the left, the white bars, these are people that are blind from cataracts, and so their hormone levels, I think the top one on the left there is growth hormone, there's cortisol, metabolites of adrenaline, thyroid hormones, gonadotrophins, and when you remove the cataracts via surgery and allow light to enter the eyes again, you can see that their hormones in the dark bar on the right increases significantly. So yeah, now that we've sort of described this beautiful tract or pathway, we can ask ourselves why is it so important? What does the SCN do? And that's where we can dig into chronobiology, which is the study of time in biology. And with the day and night cycle, we can see that life evolved in the presence of very predictable changes. And one of those is the day and night cycle. And it allows organisms to both adapt and predict certain environments. And so it can alter its behavior and biochemistry according to that predictable change. So over half of our genes are under circadian control. Energy, metabolism, cellular maintenance, division, communication, secretion, almost every drug target is circadian. And so we can see how deep this runs into our biology. All of you know this already. Circadian disruption is implicated in most major diseases. If you just type it in PubMed, you'll come up with basically a link with any disease known to modern man. So how are these circadian rhythms regulated? I don't think I'm going to go too deep into this because you will know this already. It's basically just the stimulation of blue and green light on the melanopsin in the retina is going to inhibit melatonin secretion at night. And so that's why artificial light is so very dangerous. This is again just an illustration of how these modern light sources are rich in isolated blue light, and they can actually suppress a lot of our melatonin. So yeah, we should be living under candlelight or darkness after sunset. This is very interesting. The risk of heart attacks increases by 24% after daylight saving time. So if we just change our clocks by a single hour, it's going to actually lead to a lot of issues. What about our gut health? Does light play a role there as well? Constant light exposure impacts gut microbiota and its metabolic products. It impairs the gut barrier and function, gut-liver axis, promoting NAFLD. So we can ask ourselves, what does that mean for those dealing with IBS or dysbiosis or a leaky gut? And there's some cool studies looking at red light therapy or photobiomodulation on the gut, and actually it improves the diversity of the gut microbiome, which many people find, they don't believe it really until they see the studies. But what else can light do for us? So ultraviolet light, we have a very unhealthy relationship with it these days. We don't want to be looking like one of these people who are fearing the sun. But it's important to know that the ultraviolet photons carry a lot of energy, and we have to rekindle a healthy relationship with this light. So we are told that UV light gets blocked by the cornea, but this is not entirely true. 1% of UV B light gets through, and 3% of UVA light gets through. And so once you understand that small amounts of light can have a non-linear effect on our biology, we begin to realize how important this is. And so small stimulus can lead to massive effects. And then we can talk a bit about POMC. UVB, as well as blue light, stimulates the expression of a gene in the hypothalamus and the skin as well, called POMC. And we'll take a closer look at it now. So this is the protein that then gets clipped into all of these subsequent proteins here. So we have alpha MSH, beta, gamma, ACTH, a couple others, and beta endorphin as well. So we're just going to take a look at all of these and what they do in our body. So alpha MSH is crucial to the leptin-melanocortin pathway. It's a peptide hormone that plays a significant role in regulating energy balance, and so it's actually going to reduce our appetite. It's going to upregulate our metabolism through thyroid function, which will lead to the sort of uncoupling or thermogenesis, which is the uncoupling of our mitochondria to produce heat. So yeah, we can ask ourselves, might our light environment play a role in the obesity epidemic? And I think so. Then gamma MSH. So gamma MSH regulates the salt balance via our kidneys, and so it reduces salt-induced hypertension or high blood pressure. And so when centralized physicians tell you that you need to go on a low-salt diet because you have high blood pressure, maybe what you really need is a bit more UV light. Then we have ACTH here as well. And there is a theory that blue light preferentially clips POMC into ACTH, which stimulates cortisol production. And this can be very useful in the morning. This is why it's so important to get outside as soon as you wake up. But what happens if we're stimulating ACTH production in the nighttime? We're going to have cortisol elevated late into the evening. And so what does this mean for those who are chronically stressed, for those on the verge of burnout, or those experiencing adrenal fatigue? Then we have beta endorphins here. So POMC will also cleave into beta endorphins if we're exposed to sunlight. And we can see by these article headings here: sun addiction, evolutionary survival advantage, addicted to the sun, is it in our genes? And so we can ask ourselves, if the sun is so bad for us, then why did nature design us to be addicted to it? And these are some of the functions of beta endorphin. Boosts mood and cognitive function. It's also an immunoregulator. And interestingly, it enhances baseline dopamine levels, which is crucial for critical thinking, empathy, and open-mindedness. Unfortunately, I think over 10 to 20% of our population is on antidepressants. And so we can see, and we have a lot of drug addiction issues as well. And if we don't get our beta endorphins from the sun and by moving and exercise, our body is going to seek opioid substances elsewhere. So we can have another look at blood pressure here. Ultraviolet light is going to stimulate nitric oxide production. And that's going to dilate our blood vessels, increase oxygen delivery and waste removal. And so as you move away from the equator with less UV light, you can see in these graphs here, blood pressure is actually going to increase. And cardiac mortality also has a very seasonal pattern, and so in the winters we tend to get a big spike in these as well. And then we can move on to vitamin D. You all know that UVB light stimulates vitamin D production in the skin. Um, I just want to talk a bit about what I learned from Dr. Alexander Wunsch. He basically described the transport mechanism of vitamin D and how it's bound to a vitamin D binding protein which has a really strong affinity for it, and so it's going to pull vitamin D out of the skin and into the bloodstream. However, if we take supplements, vitamin D supplements, it's going to utilize this sort of lipid binding proteins instead. And the analogy he uses is that the lipid binding proteins are like an unregistered mail, and no one knows where they're going, they never get to the right places. But the vitamin D binding protein is like DHL premium service, basically, and it always gets to where it needs to go. Another reason why I think centralized medicine is not understanding the full picture of vitamin D is because it has so many different metabolites. You can see on the left here, all of these metabolites have a role to play, and just because we don't yet understand what they do, it doesn't mean that we get to ignore them. And so yeah, we can ask ourselves, do we really think that vitamin D pills can substitute natural sunlight? I think centralized medicine falls prey to believing simplistic stories when the truth is actually a lot more complex. And this is Dunning-Kruger maxing. We're on the left there, we're at the peak of Mount Stupid, we're very confident, but we're not very confident, and we want to change that. So yeah, everything I've talked about just now, it basically highlights that the metabolites of light and the metabolites of darkness, vitamin D and melatonin, they connect with all of these sort of neurological and endocrine systems, and that's how we regulate our biology. So with the immune system as well, vitamin D upregulates regulatory immune cells, nitric oxide, POMC metabolites such as beta endorphin and cortisol also regulate the immune system. And so we can ask ourselves, what does this mean for autoimmune disease? Multiple sclerosis has one of the largest associations, or the strongest associations with latitude. For every degree further north or south you travel, there are an extra 4 cases per 100,000 people. And actually, I think the same takes place with type 1 diabetes, where if you live on the equator, you have a 10 to 15 times or lower risk of developing type 1 diabetes. This is a very interesting case study that I came across. If we look at Iran, which is fairly close to the equator, so we would expect a multiple sclerosis rate that is in alignment with a lower latitude. However, I can't remember the dates exactly, but after the Islamic Revolution, when people had to change the way they dressed and we had to wear more long sleeves and covering their skin, actually the rate of MS increased by 800% over 20 years. And so that's how we can see that cultural shifts actually impact our relationship with the sun and our health as well. So just a summary slide. UV light will upregulate our innate immune system. It increases our ability to fight infections, and it's going to regulate our adaptive immune system, which is what is sort of out of whack with autoimmune disease. Sex hormones as well. This slide is for Mark. So UVB exposure increases circulating sex steroid levels in mice and humans. UVB exposure enhances female attractiveness and receptiveness towards males. And it also increases romantic passion, so we can see how our sex hormones are also tied to our light environment. There are some dangers of ultraviolet light, which often we come across. There's sort of association with wrinkles, accelerated aging of the skin, damage to the retina, and non-melanoma skin cancers. But this is really a very new concern. Humans have evolved for millions of years without the use of sunscreen, and lions and rhinos, they don't wear hats, they don't wear sunglasses, and yes, and the reason why is because nature has figured out this balance. In nature, we are never exposed to potentially damaging high energy UV or blue light, which is very important for our metabolic processes, without accompanying protective near-infrared photons. And so 50 to 70% of photons emitted from the sun fall in the near-infrared range. And the reason why this is so important is because near-infrared photons are protective. So there's a very good study from Dr. Alexander Wunsch showing that near-infrared light is photoprotective. Sort of going out to see the sunrise is going to be the same as putting on sunscreen equal to SPF 15. And so if we're just in alignment with nature's rhythms, we're going to be getting that protection for that strong UV light in the afternoon. And then if you watch sunset again, that's going to help us repair our skin, our eyes, and our DNA. And I learned this from Scott Zimmerman, who did some cool work on the optics of the human body. And what you can see is that the human body is really designed to capture near-infrared photons. The picture on the top right here shows the whiteness of the trees and the grass shows near-infrared photons being reflected, whereas the darkness of the blood vessels in the hand show that this is where near-infrared photons are being concentrated and absorbed. And yeah, here we can see that plant chlorophyll and hemoglobin are actually very similar in structure, and so maybe we were wrong to think that animals are so separated from sunlight compared to plants. This is a very cool slide as well, which shows that near-infrared light improves glucose regulation after eating, and so maybe we need to care a bit less about the contents of our food and more about where we're eating it. And so we should be eating outside whenever possible. So yeah, I've described a lot about the importance of light for our health, but many in this space simply focus on longevity. How long are we going to live? Can we keep humans alive forever? And actually, sun avoidance is as bad for lifespan as smoking. So it's very applicable here as well. This is a summary of the environmental mismatches I could come up with, but in terms of light, we have artificial blue light at night. We have very inconsistent light and dark cycles. We have low brightness days, and well, maybe not us, but many people haven't seen a sunrise or a sunset in the last decade. We lack seasonal light variation. If we live in a high latitude, we have more darkness in the winter. We also are deficient in ultraviolet and near-infrared light, and then there's flicker as well. So yeah, the reason why I find it so interesting to talk about the biophysical and biochemistry effects of light is because otherwise the sort of recommendations you give to people, they seem too basic, they're too free, they're too easy to do, and so they don't buy into it. But really, what we need to do is get outside as much as possible. We need to expose our eyes and our skin to the sun. We need to watch the sunrise and the sunset. We need to embrace darkness after sunset, and we want to block artificial blue light at night by getting some Viva rays. And yeah, many of these things, they might seem inconvenient to us sometimes, but the important thing to remember is that nature doesn't care about our convenience, and so we need to take this into account. We like to keep things comfortable, we like to be in a very sort of non-painful state, but actually pain is a very important evolutionary mechanism, and it helps to keep us healthy and doing the right things. This is just some quotes from Jacob Lieberman. It appears that not a single cell in the body can escape the influence of light striking the eyes. And from John Ott as well, when trace amounts of certain wavelengths of light are missing from your light diet, this can have a staggering effect on your health. So yeah, I hope I've managed to achieve the goal of this talk, which was that light touches everything, and that we are beings of light. And just one more slide to bring it back to evolution. Many people think that genes are the only evolutionary mechanism, but actually culture is also one of these mechanisms, and it allows our generic species to live in very niche environments. And so we can see on the left here that sort of in the Arctic, seal hunting is a pathway to survival, but on the right here, the Aborigines, Australians, they've developed, ways to start fires, they've developed ways to track water underground and track animals as well. And this is how we can survive in harsh environments, and despite the superficial comfort of modern life, I think we also live in a very harsh environment, and so we need to change our culture, one that moves away from artificial light and isolation, and one that appreciates the sun more. And so what we need is a solar culture. Cool. Thank you very much.